All right, good morning. Welcome to Business Lens on Rapid TV. I am Faith Stafford Joseph, and as usual, we get to unpack different stories in the headlines, talking about what's going on in the economy, in finance, and in business. All right, and there are several headlines that we're looking at. Today, also talking about the fact that, the Nigerian Minister for Finance and Coordinating Minister of the Economy is back. There were reports that he had to go abroad for treatment, but he said he's back, he's fine, and he's ready to continue with his duties. I hope that, of course, calms ruffled feathers about how that could impact the economy. And we also get to talk about, Dangote Refinery and marketers having agreed on a number of letters that will be, sort of like deposited by the refinery, 600 million liters. What is that about? We get to give you more information about that. And then the IMF has listed fastest growing economies in Africa. Nigeria doesn't happen to be one of them. And then we'll also be talking about the Nigerian First policy. Their push for it to get into the Procurement Act. Is that really necessary? I'm back out of this, of course, with my in-house analyst here, Mr. Daniel Effa, Financial Global Market Analyst. Good to have you on the show.
Good morning, Faith. How was your weekend?
It was fine. It was a weekend of football. Hope you were okay.
Of course, definitely.
All right, then. So let's get into the conversation. Let's start, of course, with the IMF listing fastest growing economies in Africa. And we know that, I would always say this, the president talked about, us having moved past the worst and says that, macroeconomic reforms, they are having an impact, they're doing well for the economy, and we're now on the right track, right? And then you also have even the IMF and other international bodies commending, this administration for the stands and the reforms that they're taking. But what is very interesting is that the IMF is listing countries in Africa that are the five, emerging, economies, and Nigeria is not one of them. I don't know whether the reforms, whether they need more time to take a foothold, but Nigeria is not listed amongst them. So according to the IMF, we know that the fastest growing economies in Africa are Benin Republic, Cote d'Ivoire, Ethiopia, Rwanda, and Uganda. And the IMF is saying that these economies are listed because of their improved fiscal management, investment in infrastructure and manufacturing, and of course, sustained policy reforms. So is it too early for Nigeria to be listed, considering the fact that even the IMF has commended this administration for the reforms, or is it just that is not enough?
Okay, so I think that we cannot say we are the fastest conversation yet, because when we look at GDP projections from most of all those countries we talked about, at the beginning of the year, they were averaging about 5-6%. Benin Republic, for example, it was about 6-7%, right? So when you compare GDP growth for countries like that, compared to we are just doing 4% GDP for the first time in over 7-8 years. Okay, so and we've averaged 3% since after the Russian-Ukraine crisis broke out. So it is too early to start saying we are one of the fastest, because the reforms have just started. Like they are at the initial phase of, okay, these are the policies. Now the next conversation is where are the institutions that will back these policies, where are the infrastructure that will back these policies for it to make sense. So that is the second phase that we are. So we are hoping that for next year, for example, if we can average a 5-6% GDP growth, then we can now be beginning to say Nigeria is part of those countries in terms of fastest growing, and we still need to also expand the economy. Our GDP figures is showing that there is a lot of room for expansion, and that is what the growth would basically reflect. So it is too early. Why I usually laugh at those conversations, particularly when it comes to the fastest growing conversation, is that when you see the projections of IMF or the World Bank of countries in Africa, you realize that Togo, Benin Republic are very high figures, and these are economies that practically feed off the Nigerian economy. It is not. This one is not a saying it back. It's a fact, right? So if you check the numbers of exports, of imports, or how the trade really flows in those countries, you realize that it is off the inefficiencies of our own economy that these countries feed off. So if Benin Republic is there, it just shows that we should be doing better than what we are doing. It just shows our excesses, and that is what we need to really work on. Kudos to them again, because it's one thing to have a big economy by your side and also be able to feed up their economy.
Benefit of it.
We have Niger not doing something like that. Chad is not. So kudos to Benin Republic, for example, for what they are doing. Yeah.
So you're saying that Benin Republic is one of the fastest growing economies in Nigeria, in Africa, because of Nigeria?
Of course, because it is 100%. Because then what makes an economy grow faster is the market, right? And where else is the Benin Republic market? Yeah, we've seen conversations around, even for example, one of our most consumed product, which is rice. You see that from Europe, this rice would go into countries like Benin Republic, like Togo, and they package and they find their way. Exactly. So that is less than 15-20 million people you get, but growing very fast, because of course there is a market.
And of course, when you're talking about the biggest economies in Africa, you're not calling those countries.
Of course
you're calling Nigeria, you're calling South Africa, you're calling Egypt. I mean, and they're not among the fastest growing economies. So it's very interesting when you look at the dichotomy, and how that works. But then, of course, if you look at the GDP projection for countries in sub-Saharan Africa, it's 4.1%, and the IMF just revised the projection for Nigeria to 3.9. And we actually got to 4.2,
yes.
So for the first time in a while. So I mean, we don't expect it to start to reflect immediately. But then, of course, the administration has always also told us that it will take some time to reflect.
Of course. There's no need to rush. I think that the concern around fastest growing economy is something that you really don't necessarily wait for the optics. You just keep doing your thing and you get noticed, basically. We were like that some 10, 11 years ago. We started having the fastest growing economy globally, not even Africa. And basically, we're just doing our thing, and it became public notice, and everybody could see that our reforms, our policies were actually hitting the right spot.
But one of the things that you can also see here, it's not just the stability of the macroeconomic reforms, that they have, or macroeconomic policies. It's also investment in infrastructure and investment in manufacturing. Those two places are places that Nigeria really has not done anything about in recent times.
We are really lacking in those, and I think that is where the real work is. And that's why I keep saying, yes, we've done the reforms. It is just the minimum expectation that you should do. The next phase is the real work. How are you going to ensure that the economy actually expands, right? You cannot do so much in the oil sector. If you formal, it's 100% formal. That sector naturally attracts people itself, because then it's a resource. But the real work, manufacturing, improving trade, which is a function of infrastructure, that is the actual, you get what the actual pointer that can give us a 6%, 7% GDP growth. Because if you can solve those two things, you are good. And that is what those countries that have been cited are talking about. They've gone very large extent into ensuring that there's infrastructure. There's also what we call institutions, quality institutions, because one of the biggest issues that we have, particularly when it comes to ease of doing business, is that we do not have very robust institutions. We still have a lot of bottlenecks here and there, and those are the things
bureaucracy.
Exactly, those are the things that you as a business person would always improve the quality of your business, and most likely even bring prices down. And if you bring prices down, people are able to consume more, and you can have a bigger economy. So at the end of the day, the issues are still there, right? We've really done the basics. Now we need to now go into the building upon what we've already done.
I mean, now we have policies. So can we now move to make sure that we have infrastructural growth and invest more in manufacturing, and make sure that we are actually able to compete?
That's the goal. That's the goal.
We'll see if this is taken in good faith. I mean, usually when we have this sort of things no, we don't agree. At
this point, you can't argue. The numbers are there. You can't argue against the numbers, because you can't say you've grown so fast when this is the first time you're doing 4% in how many months. The policies have been running for over 24 months, and now you're just getting into 4% growth, or just getting into a level of consistent declining inflation. So you can't begin to ask. And
most of it, you can also still look at the fact that we have a lot more, in oil production now. Oil production has gone up, which has contributed largely, to this, which also means that we're still a bit too concentrated. Yes, we know that, non-oil exports are growing, but we're still a bit too concentrated where oil is concerned.
Yes, we are. And that won't change anytime soon. We're hoping the new tax laws will probably bring a sort of relief to the government coffers in terms of what the revenue numbers will be looking at. But I think that if it's a resource, there's no point changing what works, right? The real concern for us has always been ensuring that you are making maximum value of your resource. That has always been the issues. We've not really enjoyed that, considering the fact that we've had high oil prices in the last 5 years compared to the previous 5 years, right? So it's that's, I think that is where the real concern is. If the only thing you have is the resource, then make enough money from the resource, right? Ensure that the resource provides enough value that can help the country either way, whether through the end users or through government revenue. Let's just make money for us, basically.
Let's talk about what the IMF is talking about again, looking at blended finance. They're talking about how blended finance is actually very low in sub-Saharan Africa, and that's talking about debt management, debt swaps. You know, they're just listing in very few countries that have actually been involved in that, saying that, you know, sub-Saharan Africa needs to do a lot more where blended finance is concerned, have more debt swaps, look at concessional grants, and not just take on debt that you have to spend so much money to pay for. What about your debt swaps? You know, that can actually spur growth and investor confidence. So Nigeria actually is also failing in this aspect. Let's talk about blended finance and why it is not pushed for in Africa.
I think that I think one of the biggest wins of the last administration in terms of I think the Minister of Works really pushed blended finance in terms of the PPP concessioning roads and all, because one thing has been the issue has been efficiency in Africa. I think that if you remove the need for the policymakers to always want to have access to that cash, you realize that we would have gotten a lot more things done, right, in terms of arrangements with private entities. Let's fix this road. You collect tolls on them. I think even Lagos, for example, the Lekki concession company really pulled off because of that kind of policy.
Actually.
So when you look at the fact that you've seen it across board, that government has always initiated projects. If an initiated project is excessively expensive, it's more than 3-4 times the actual price on global level. Number one. Number two is efficiency. Sometimes this road takes a lot of time to complete, and when they are completed, the maintenance is a problem, right? So even though there are bodies that is meant to solve this problem, but because there is already an inefficiency conversation, so why not just make it a PPP thing? Let the private guys come on board. Let it be a sort of a relief. We tried it with NNPC in 2022, 2021. We tried it with Dangote. I think there's an existing one. There's an existing one with MTN. So I think that would solve our problem only faster than anything, because tax relief trade-off for these guys.
But if you look at this administration, it's very big on collecting taxes, and then you know, there was already a commission about, you know, trying to end a bit of this tax relief thing for some companies, and you're looking at the fact that you know, government also likes to take on every project themselves. You know, they want to take on every development of infrastructure by themselves, even though we know that if you look at, you know, when there was constitutional amendments that we moved things like even railways and all of that, we moved them to concurrence, which also means that you can get private bodies involved, you know. So now there's constitutional empowerment, but we're not still flowing where that is concerned. The government still wants to do everything themselves.
Exactly. So that has been a big, because we had infrastructure concern that we have it in health, we have it in transport, right? Those two things, for example, should have been, you get primary healthcare, for example, should be handled, should be a partnership with a local organization that is interested in, and you realize that it will be more functional, it will be more available, you get, because then you can still, you've done it with power, right? You've let it go private, even though you still have a lot of influence that is still causing inefficiencies. But let us start that process, right? Why can't we just say this is 10,000 kilometers of roads, right, across Nigeria, across federal roads. If you're interested in doing this, if you're whether you're foreign direct investment, yeah, tax free for 10 years, we need to do this, because when the chips were down, we used crude, right, to as swaps, right? So why can't we also do the same across board? Because what is the point of having a lot of resource when you cannot necessarily use it for your own benefit? Because the need to always want to have cash, get loans, get grants, it's not going to help at the end of it, because and that is usually my fear with government having so much money in its cover. It will still find its way to borrow more, right? So what is the point?
And like you said, you're borrowing, you know, for infrastructure. Exactly. We're not saying infrastructure, but you're borrowing so much more.
So that is one of the dynamic ways. I think that I'm happy that at this IMF could cite an example of countries that have already started doing this, and I think that is what would take us to the next level. For most advanced countries, look at it, one way or the other, practice building finance to get to where they are in terms of infrastructural development. So it is not, government cannot do everything. Government should not do everything, right? It's meant to just stay on one side. Allow private hands take up this.
Just work as regulators. Okay, so speaking about power, one of the issues that we've had with especially distribution companies I've talked about last week also, is their inability to actually meter and you know collect you know, monies from people that use power, right? So now you have NEC stepping in. I know if it's a good thing or not, you know, because when we see this intervention, this is not the first time that we've seen the issue of we're trying to get meters for everybody, but NEC is doing it once more. They've approved the disbursement of 28 billion naira to discos for the procurement and installation of meters under the Meter Acquisition Fund Tranche B scheme. And this is to make sure that they distribute these meters at no cost to people in Band A and Band B. And according to NEC, this is going to help you know, for long-term financing and liquidity in the sector, because now they are able to meter and collect, you know, levies from people. But looking at the fact that NEC is the one stepping in to do this, 28 billion, you know, is it something that should be encouraged for us to continue doing this? Can't discos take this on themselves, especially considering the fact that 40% of disco is actually owned by the federal government?
I really don't understand, but I think that we should just take this policy as it is, in terms of the end game should just be the discos actually metering their subscribers, because when you look at a similar vein with telcos, I use telcos a lot. Telcos also came into this space, built their own infrastructure, and there was a time it was expensive to even use your SIM. They brought it down, made it cheaper, so that everybody can own a SIM, and because then that was for them the scaling of the business, right? If I got to a point, it was basically free to own a SIM, right? They could give you 100 naira for 5, for 10, right? So that was what really turned the tide in terms of level of subscribers, and now they have done almost 70-80% penetration in the Nigerian space. So then you can now determine what level of price segmentation you want to do, whether it is this level of calls, data. But first things first is to get them as subscribers. I don't know why these discos are not pushing this as a major focus. Up until now, in fact, even with this whole NEC thing, you will still hear that some discos are still charging subscribers to still fix meters, and it baffles me. These subscribers would be paying, right? It is your easiest way of actually calculating how much comes in you get on a daily basis. Exactly. So why are you still giving people estimated billing, like to achieve what? Because that is where the corruption really has persisted, inefficiency has persisted, right? Yeah, when I talk about electricity theft, it is your business. You factor out systems to stop that, right? It is people who find ways to sabotage anything if they see the opportunity to anywhere in the world. It's a human behavior. It is not peculiar to Nigeria. So what you should do is find out systems that will solve that problem. But in terms of ensuring everybody is metered, it shouldn't be something that that government has to intervene in. It should be what should be a strategy for your business, because you are calculating how do I efficiently, because when people get power, there's a likelihood they would pay for the power, right? So the prepaid meter, a prepaid option, is what really guarantees you making money off these people. We've seen areas, even in the FCT, that you see them have issues with AEDC workers, fights on the street, and or because these people are estimated billings, right? If you put them on the prepaid meter, they just pay as the power comes. So it will now be left to you to ensure that power actually gets there, so they can pay for it. So could it be that it's because they're not sure of actually giving these people power that it's much easier to just do estimated billing? Exactly. I think it's more about the inefficiency. I think it's more because when you look at the estimated billing, you realize that the numbers are sometimes even not
reflective.
Exactly. That is what really causes the friction. Like, why are you bringing this amount of money when? Do you get my point? So all those calculations is not necessary. Why not just so it's just like saying Entok is not giving me a SIM card, so doesn't even track my usage of anything and just wants me to bring me a bill at the end of the month. It doesn't make sense, and that is what I think NEC is saying. The government is saying is that if we don't do it, these people will not do it.
But are they supposed to be taught to do it? Because this is supposed to be business. So that means that you're supposed to understand the advantage of volume. You're supposed to understand the value, the advantage of scaling up. So why do they need to be helped every single time they are arms taking and being taught how to do this or helped out of it?
I think of all the parts that were disbanded from the power holding company, I think the discos were the
weakest link.
Yeah, the weakest link. They were the most inefficient because they are the ones that interact with the customers. They are the ones that have the direct relationship with the customer. So if they were not good enough, right, there was no point selling businesses to people based on bureaucracy, nepotism. It wasn't necessary, because no matter what happens 10 years down the line, we are now suffering for this particular inefficiency. Because no matter how you look at it, you might say, yes, Nigerians don't pay for power, but I will tell you, if more people are actually captured the right way, you realize that suddenly they will make more money, right? That is why you see states like Lagos, right, like Ibadan, tends to their numbers in terms of recovery is like almost 65 to 70%, right? So those and if you look at them in relation to other discos, you realize that some of them are banks are even taking some of them over. They are in serious debt. So I do not agree that it is an entirely unprofitable business. I don't completely agree. I think it is profitable. I think what they've not done is not set up the right infrastructure, because if you are critical about service delivery, if your distribution network is perfect, you realize that you will be the one losing when you don't give them, when you don't supply them power, because then you know that everything is perfect. But how many times will you see a distribution company in Nigeria right now that a day, in fact, 3, 4, 5 times a day, you don't see them complain about a certain feeder is down, something else is off. So
and they communicate now, so I guess that's a good thing.
Fair point.
All right, we'll go on a very quick break, and when we return, we will continue this conversation talking about the Nigeria First policy, as well as the Minister of Finance is back. Okay, stay with our Business Lens on Rapid TV.